And so, after stoking coal furnaces miserable winter after miserable winter, and seeing posters, postcards, photos, and books about Florida, is there a plan? Looks like a plan. But how to get there? Road systems in the United States at the turn of the 20th century were fairly dismal. They really had not been improved for over 100 years. It was almost difficult to get from one city to another, much less from one state to another, and Florida was no different. However, you could get to anywhere practically in the United States by railroads. And in Florida, there were two railroads developed by the two Henrys. Henry Flagler, who was Rockefeller's partner and the genius behind Standard Oil, had built his railroad from Manhattan to Miami and eventually to the Florida Keys, and his compatriot, Henry Plant, had bought up defunct railroads after the Civil War and built his railroad from the north and west down to Florida, especially the west coast, and ending in Tampa, where he built the port city of Tampa. From there, he had steamship lines going to Cuba and South America. Both Henrys figured that they would improve their bottom line by importing valuable goods from South America. It wasn't long, however, before they realized that with the addition of Pullman cars, sleepers, and dining cars, they could offer direct lines to Florida for tourists. But these tourists were of high means. When they went to Florida, it was usually for the entire season. As such, both Henrys built these grand hotels to offer the entire season for these tourists at $100 a night, which is now the equivalent of $1,500 today. Normally, a roadside hotel would be $2. The keystones for both these hotel railroads were Plant's Tampa Bay Hotel with its minarets you see on the left, and Flagler's Ponce de Leon in St. Augustine on the right. Plant's Tampa Bay Hotel is now a museum, and Flagler's Ponce de Leon is now part of Flagler College, but you can still rent a room there. A few tourists traveled by early auto trains, such as this Buffalo to Miami run, at considerable cost. However, once you got to Miami, there really were no road systems to get you out, so you basically tootled around the city in your automobile. But there was a third Henry, Henry Ford, the inventor of Ford's Model T, in production from 1908 to 1927. It has been deemed the most influential car of the 20th century. It was inexpensive, simple, rugged, reliable, and had interchangeable parts. In 1919, the Model T cost $385 new, and Ford's adaptation of the assembly line in 1913 reduced production time from 12 hours to 40 seconds for each Model T. Over 15 million of these Model Ts were produced in all continents except Antarctica. In 1916, the Model T accounted for 1/2 of all US cars registered. This particular Model T you see here predates the 1919 model, which offered an electric battery, electric start, and electric lights. You're looking at a series of lights that were offered by the Prestolite company, and more on that in a moment. So we had an excellent car. It could go practically anywhere. The problem was we didn't have a road system to support these vehicles. It took the vision of Carl Fisher to continue the good roads movement, which was begun at the turn of the century by bicyclists. His vision was to develop a coast-to-coast highway, the Lincoln Highway it was finally named, and it was done without any kind of federal aid. He got together all his Detroit automobile company owners and the parts owners as well, and had them donate enough money so that they could actually build the Lincoln Highway. It was completed in 1913 and ran from Times Square in Manhattan to San Francisco. Not being content with the east-west highway, his next vision was to produce the Dixie Highway, the north-south route. There were two particular routes involved, the first from Chicago to Miami, and the second from Sault Ste. Marie in Michigan at the northern tip, also to Miami. That same year, the Atlantic Highway was developed, running from Calais, Maine, in northern Maine, all the way to Miami. And a fourth highway, the Great Lakes Atlantic Highway, was developed that same year. This ran from Cleveland to Miami. Now, once you got to Florida in your automobile, there were two routes, one for the west coast to Tampa and one to the east for Miami. Eventually, the Tamiami Trail would link the west and the east coasts. These two maps indicate the two major highways, the Dixie Highway on the left, showing the east and west divisions converging and then running all the way down to Miami. This would receive primarily US 41 when the federal government began assigning route numbers to it in 1926. But there were also 18 other route numbers assigned to the Dixie Highway. It was a very confusing network of roads. The Atlantic Highway, conversely, was a straight line, a linear route, but joined the Dixie in Jacksonville to Miami and later would receive US Route 1 in 1926. Now, the Good Roads movement didn't promise good roads, nor did it always deliver. Road hazards were plentiful. The definition of a good road around the campfire was, that's a good road. Somebody just made it through there yesterday. Motorists traveled with at least one spare and several inner tube patch kits, such as the Camel tube patch kit and the Firestone tube patch kit seen on the right. This gentleman here on the left in the photo is about to change tires and rims on his automobile after removing some tent camping equipment, and his compatriot on the right, who has not gotten out of his car, has a huge tent roll strapped to the front bumper, which is blocking half the radiator. Also, note this mysterious object on top of the radiator, and more on that after a while. Now, we're fortunate enough to have a journal that was kept by a gentleman from LaSalle, Michigan, on his first trip to Tampa. LaSalle, Michigan is just north of Toledo, Ohio. The trip took 17 days, and an average 100 miles a day was considered a good run at 12 miles an hour. Pavement was scarce, found mostly in the cities, if at all. Otherwise, roads consisted of dirt, mud, and sand. It was a network of existing roads and easy to get lost. And taking a page from the earlier Lincoln Highway, the states began painting utility poles with red and white horizontal stripes with the DH logo. Motorists encountered washed out bridges or no bridges at all. Here they relied on rope-pulled flatbeds or scows, or actually took off their shoes and forded the river to find the most shallow place to get across, fording the river in their fords. They also encountered steep mountains and grades littered with cars and burned-out engines. Overheating was common. Tire blowouts were constant. It was also not unusual to drive into mud up to the axles, whereupon you needed a farmer and a team of horses to pull you out. They drove through swamps with snakes and mosquitoes and hoped they didn't have a breakdown. There were few services along these routes, so motorists had to plan their daily trips carefully, often overnighting at filthy camps. Now, the photo on the right shows a very common situation with an overheated Ford Model T. Cars of that era did not have water pumps and relied on careful consideration of how much water was in the radiator. Coolant and antifreeze didn't come on the market until the late 20s. It was alcohol-based, often with disastrous results to your engine, plus the alcohol boiled off almost immediately. Here we see a modern ferry with a cranked winch. This particular vehicle and its occupants is lucky to actually have mechanical means to cross this highway to the other side. Otherwise, you actually pulled yourself along with a series of ropes. Nevertheless, it was Florida, here we come. And who arrived by auto? Not the wealthy. It was the new middle class, made possible in part by the Ford Model T. They came with their auto tents, such as the compact auto touring tent you see here, which offered 2 private rooms, 2 entrances, and 2 sling hammers, and a snake-proof floor, all for $6.50. They came with freestanding tents, such as the Birch Nifty Umbrella Auto Tent, which could be erected from road to camp in 5 minutes, provided it wasn't at night. or in the rain. They came in pop-up camping trailers, such as the AutoCamp trailer you see here, which in 1918 sold for $385, the same price as a Model T. They came singly or in groups. No trunk, no problem. Early automobiles did not have an integral trunk. Some had a luggage rack which folded down, but it wasn't nearly enough to hold all the gear necessary, so any horizontal surface would do. Most traveled in AutoCampers, but a few wealthier ones came with Glenn Curtis's Adams Motor Bungalow. It was the first commercially built trailer in production from 1917 to 1923 at a cost of $1,200. When no more affluent buyers could be found, production stopped. The Adams was named after Glenn Curtis's brother-in-law, whom he installed to run the company. When he took over the company, it was later renamed the Curtis Aerocar and resumed production in 1926 and stopped in 1942 because of the war effort. Many came in homemade house cars, such as this one you see here, and for some reason, faux brick siding was very popular. Also note this curious object on top of the radiator again. Another house car, and note the chimney, which we hope is faux brick, but this particular vehicle has faux brick fenders and a running board. Note also the huge trunk in the back, and inexplicably, a clothes horse sprouting from the front running board. Some came in conversions, such as this extended bed of a Model T pickup with a trick slide out underneath for cooking and camping. Some came in aftermarket conversions, such as the Zagelmeyer camper car, produced in Bay City, Michigan for $550. It was a very trick affair and replaced the entire body of the Model T from the hood back. When you folded down the sleeping platforms, the roof would rise for installation of inserts containing screens or windows. A few wealthier canners, of course, eschewing the long rides, arrived by dirigible. So who were these guys, and how were they able to spend 6 months or more in Florida? Well, they were the burgeoning middle class. They came from 380 different occupations, including professionals and the trade. Farmers, dairymen, contractors, builders, carpenters, electricians, painters, doctors, lawyers, bankers, merchants, policemen, preachers, war veterans, manufacturers, show business people, retirees, service pensioners, and their families. They were neither filthy rich nor were they dirt poor. The common denominator they all shared was the love of the open road. In 1919, 24 campers converged at Tampa's DeSoto Municipal Park to form the Tin Can Tourist. Now, how did this happen? Did they all leave from the same city or town at the same time? Did they meet up along the road? Did they meet up at a specific campground? Not likely. Back in the day, it was common for towns and cities to offer municipal campgrounds for auto tent campers. Sometimes they actually were around the town square or city square, but often just a few miles outside of town. The reciprocal agreement was that you would buy gas and oil or get repairs or buy food or clothes or any kind of hardware that you needed to continue the rest of the journey. Certainly, when these campers came to Tampa, they asked where the municipal park was and were directed to DeSoto Municipal Park. Now about the Tin Can Tourist, what's in a name? How did this come about? Here's an entry from the 1919 Journal of Mr. William Austin of LaSalle, Michigan. About that time, the city tourists found out we were having such a good time, they wanted to take over the Tampa Park. We talked about it in our nightly meetings. One night, Mr. Heisler talked about it. He suggested we call our organization the Tin Can Tourists after our Tin Lizzies, Tin Lizzie being an affectionate name for the Model T. All other cars had a hard time getting through the sand roads. I supported Mr. Heisler's motion. The motion carried. Before that, we had a dozen names. In fact, everyone almost you talked to had a different name. Mr. Freeman was elected our can opener. The Tin Can Tourist of America received their official Florida state charter a year later in 1920, and in the 30s, it would become Tin Can Tourists of the World. About the actual tin can, and putting to bed the urban myth another entry from the same journal, Mr. Obelstead went down on 7th Street and purchased gas at a reduction of 1 cent per gallon if we would buy our gasoline from him. He told us to put a tin can on the radiator for identification as TCTs to buy gas. It was non-law before, everyone had cans for their cars. After we named it Tin Can Tourist, we put TCT on the cans for our emblems. So the Tin Can Tourist was not named for heavy metal cans carried for gas and water. It was not named for cans of food imported for other states. It was not named for empty or rusted tin cans soldered or welded to a radiator cap. In researching over 200 photos, I found not one with a tin can on top of a radiator cap. It was not named for tin cans slung around a radiator filler neck. The tin can was used, however, when hung from the filler neck of a disabled vehicle as a sign of distress, and as a Tin Can Tourist member, you were obligated to stop and offer help. Tin cans with painted TCT were placed in merchant store windows for discounts. And now here's this mysterious object seen over here on the right. It is a Boyce motometer. It's the first temperature gauge, and it was available for all automobiles. At a cost of $9 to $16, it was quite affordable. The $16 one was lighted at night if you wanted to travel that way, and over 12 million of these were sold. The inside of the motometer contained basically a thermometer, which you could see either water or steam rise while you were driving. Eventually, the motometer would actually be placed inside the dash. Also, part of the motometer was these dog bone extensions from the cap over the radiator, which made it much easier and much cooler to actually unscrew the cap and pour water in. Now about TCT membership, it required no dues and you received a membership card in person. The requirements were that you had to be 12 or more years old, of good moral character, and how this was determined is still unknown, live in a tent, car, house, car, trailer, or nearby cottage. The initiation consisted of learning the secret handshake, the secret sign, the secret password, and singing the Tin Can Tourist song, just as is done today. The objective was to fraternally unite all campers. There was a written constitution with articles and bylaws, among them keeping and leaving clean camps, obeying the golden rule, destroying no property, owning no Florida property as an entity, stealing nothing, and providing or enjoying wholesome entertainment. Here we see a membership card, both front and back, including the year where you joined, as well as your name. On the back was listed the officers of the Tin Can Tourist for that particular year. Club officers included the Royal Can Opener, the Secretary, the Treasurer, the Sergeant at Arms, and there were probably 14 or 15 Royal Sergeants. A police court was established for complaints. If you received 3 written complaints during your stay, you were hauled before the police court. Children could be registered to attend local schools at 50 cents a week, and growth, beginning in 1919, at 24 members, ballooned considerably in 1921 to 17,000, and a year later to 30,000. There was not just one Tin Can Tourist camp established in Florida. There were many, as we'll see in a moment. Here we see a photo of Otto Shoup, the Royal Can Opener. A title change occurred in 1922 to become the Royal Chief, perhaps as a more serious consideration of responsibilities. He's standing next to his tent, and on his left is his Packard, showing a TCT emblem affixed to the radiator and a motometer radiator cap. Here we see Otto sitting in front of the police court, and people on his right with the cloth stars were the deputies who rounded up the usual suspects for the kangaroo court for bylaw infractions. These were minor infractions incorporating the resulting minor fines. More serious infractions such as theft would have you evicted from the club. Members could be identified with the license plate topper, such as you see here, and shown by this proud member on his 1947 48 Mercury from California. Here we see an original brass medallion affixed to this radiator of an impeccably restored 1916 Model T member's car, which has now been reproduced with a date change. 2 initials badges are seen on the radiator of this 1923 Essex, and perhaps more would be available to be seen on the cars next to it, but because of the photo op, we have their owners sitting on the bumpers. This is a colorized postcard of DeSoto Park in Tampa in 1920, overlooking the beautiful Tampa Bay. Scrawled inexplicably upside down is "Just got here yesterday from Sarasota." In 1920, the park offered free sites, restrooms, a wash house, hot and cold running water, and free entertainment. Here we see a large group of canners holding up the secret C sign, and note the number of children gathered around. Information could be obtained at the wash house or campfires. It was important to find out what was going on, where the best stores or gas stations were that offered discounts, and where to go to sightsee. Often the wash house information sessions would go on for hours, both for men and women. Meetings for information were held briefly to schedule summer reunions and other Florida conventions. When you arrived at a tin can tourist camp for a convention, you were handed a printed weekly schedule. Entertainment could include pony rides, and note the number of children gathered around here. These pony rides for this particular poor animal probably lasted the entire day and resulted in one exhausted pony. Also volleyball, horseshoes, shuffleboard, cards, fishing, baseball, listening to or playing in the TCT band, and square dancing. If you wanted to dance with elephants, you could do that too, but outside the park. Other tin can tourist camps included the Gainesville camp with this magnificent Florida gate shown in 1920, the site of the Second Winter Convention. These men standing outside the gate were probably Royal Sergeants, which would ask you when you drove up to the car what the secret password was. Here we see a map of Florida showing 15 of the 38 known tin can tourist camps. The 15 are underlined in red. The big hitters for conventions included Homecoming, Thanksgiving, the Winter Convention, and Going Home Convention. Not satisfied with just meeting in Florida, it was decided to hold the first summer reunion in 1921 in Traverse City, Michigan, a popular tourist town. This article in the August 20th, 1921 Battle Creek Moon Journal basically states that several thousand tin can tourists had already arrived to renew acquaintances made in Florida or in California or in Alaska in other years. Research indicated that no such rally or reunion was held in Florida, and certainly, in California, and certainly not in Alaska, where you couldn't even drive your automobile until 1948 with the completion of the Alcan Highway, which was begun in 1942. Here we see a sign painter putting the finishing touches on tin can tourists welcoming always in Traverse City. Another photo of the summer convention in 1930 shows a whole row of auto tent campers. This would later be supplanted with the addition of hard-sided travel trailers. Now, Tampa was to hold the winter convention from 1919 to 1924, but almost immediately, the local residents across the park, located in Ybor City, a suburb of Tampa, began petitioning the city hall and continued for 4 years to reclaim their park. Jumping on this was the mayor of St. Petersburg, who said, "The more you give them, the more they want, and they bring no money into a town and help it none," said he, who had never hosted anything for the tin can tourist. Florida Governor Hardee, sensing a political win on the penny-pinching canners, stated that they came with one pair of underwear and one $20 bill and changed neither. Now, these disparaging statements were untrue, especially the underwear part. Other names affixed to the tin can tourists were trailer trash, vermin, squatters, yokels, hobos on wheels, and deadbeats. Conversely, though, the tin can tourist camps brought tens of thousands of dollars to the local economy. and were the primary reason that Florida could improve their road systems. By 1930, members were no longer considered undesirables, but the stigma continued for another 80 years. It probably didn't help that the Vagabond Coach Company had as their logo a hobo with a bindle stick. Lurid pulp fiction in the 30s, 40s, and 50s certainly didn't help this either, with such stellar titles as Trailer Park Trash and Bedrooms on Wheels. Stigma continued in the 1990s with Cousin Eddie's Condor parked outside the Griswolds' home for the National Lampoon's movie Christmas Vacation, and continues on TV to this day with the Simpson cartoon characters Cletus and Brandine Spuckler with their 70 kids, 49 of whom were named, and one is still attached by umbilical cord named Embry Joe. Now let's take a step back and look at the Braden Castle story. This was a special tin can tourist camp. In 1850, two brothers, the Braden brothers, traveled south to Florida and bought up about 900 acres along the Manatee and what would become the Braden River. There, they began their sugar plantation operation along with a large factory. It didn't last too long, as the Panic of 1857 basically recalled the entire loan. But in the meantime, Joseph Braden had built this large structure overlooking the Manatee River. It was called the Castle because it was used not only by his family, but employees as well as local settlers when Seminole Indians attacked. It was vacant for a number of years, and in the early 1900s suffered a fire which burned the roof and the floors, and it fell into ruin about that time. Now, the canner officers felt that they had a need to set down roots, permanent roots, after the 1924 ejection from Tampa. But the bylaws said that the Tin Can Tourist as an entity could not own Florida land. To get around this, the Tin Can Royal Chief and some officers, as well as some other members, created a shell club and called it Camping Tourist of America, the pin of which you can see over there on the right with the ruins of Braden Castle. Together, they bought 38 choice acres of the ex-Braden property on the Manatee and Braden Rivers for $16,000. And then they platted 200 lots for sale. If you bought a lot, you had to build your cottage within a year and a half or forfeit your deed. Rapidly, a self-contained community arose, containing a meeting hall, men's and women's clubs, gas station, library, a grocery store, a post office, a Western Union office, a barber shop, and community restrooms. 2 boat docks were built on the Braden River, and a 700-foot fishing pier was built out into the mile-wide Manatee. Also, a large camping area was cleared near the rivers. Shuffleboard and horseshoe areas were created, and a lagoon was dug in 1940. In 1983, the National Register of Historic Places recognized Braden Castle Park and elected it to the same. Currently, it is home to 6 Tin Can Tourist members and still offers a camping section. This early postcard shows the office with its bell tower and the community hall behind it. Another early postcard shows auto tent campers camping in the area overlooking the Manatee. And still another colorized postcard shows the park as it existed before 1948. You can see the 2 fishing piers on the left, as well as the 2 boat docks on the left, as well as the fishing pier on the right. You can also see the lagoon with cottages strung around it. And here are some more photos of early Braden Castle Park showing the store, which sold meats and vegetables and other notions. Also held the post office, and the building to its right was the Western Union Telegraph Office. Another postcard adjoining that shows the camping area with trailers now supplanting the auto tent campers. In the lower left is the holiday lighted gazebo overlooking the lagoon, and the original fire engine, which probably dated around 1926 or 1927, in front of the community hall. And I use the term engine loosely because it was actually pulled by humans. Now, with the increase of tin can tourists, as well as the auto camping boom hitting the entire nation, eventually incorporating 12 million campers, new industries rose to support this. They offered cooking and sleeping outfits such as Camp Cook's Kit, selling for $6.15, incorporating 53 pieces. Over on the right, you see a utility auto kitchenette made out of sheet steel, which was bolted permanently to the running board. In this case, it actually blocked the entrance to the passenger side. A smaller pantry is shown here, probably developed by the actual owner, which allowed entrance and exit to the actual front seat. Some unusual equipment, what I call manifold destiny, is an exhaust heater plumbed into the exhaust manifold to boil or fry meals. It is the quintessence of the saying, slaving over a hot stove. Really unusual equipment was this odd pressure cooker, which could be bolted to a stand on top of your bumper and use the exhaust from your exhaust pipe to be piped in and out to cook a meal in 1 hour. There's no mention of what it tasted like in the article, however. The big ticket upgrading would include the transition of tents to manufacturers' trailers. The Shenango Equipment Company offered this trailer beginning in 1922 through the Depression. It is a combination of a travel trailer and a tent, which folded out, according to the ad, in 30 seconds, believe that or not. It also cost $375. The problem with these was that they had to be constantly waterproofed. Upgrading from tent trailers to hard-sided trailers grew even more popular with the addition of Arthur Sherman's covered wagon, which he built behind his house in 1929. He took it to the Detroit Auto Show, where he received over 100 orders and decided to sell his business and go into manufacturing his covered wagon full-time. By 1938, it was producing 1,000 units per month and was the largest travel trailer manufacturer in the United States. That same year, there was competition, though. There were 800 registered travel trailer companies. It was a total of a $30 million industry. You can see the results of streamlining over a few years in the 1930s, from the original box covered wagon to the 1936 Cornell on the right. Upgrading brought manufacturers to winter conventions where they knew they had ready-made sales. It was important to upgrade your trailer almost every other year if you could afford it, and the main item being getting a toilet. It didn't matter whether it actually worked or not. If you had a toilet, you were the king on your own throne. Now, these salesmen that brought these travel trailers down to winter convention discounted them heavily because they did not want to drag them back to the East or Midwest. Here we see row upon row of new trailers at the 1949 Winter Convention, and a large group of trailers sponsored by Trailer Life magazine inside the Tampa facility. Now let's talk a little bit about the whistle stop sites. Next stop, Arcadia. Arcadia, next stop. Arcadia had built a park especially for the tin can tourist and offered them a contract beginning in 1924 through 1932. That same year, in 1924, 300,000 canners attended Winter Convention. They also held Thanksgiving Convention with the digging of long trenches, the firing of wood for charcoal, the laying down of boughs covered with fencing, which would hold meat to be barbecued. Another group meal seen here is the 1922 chow line at the Indian Atlantic camp on the Atlantic Ocean. The line of campers extends out of camera range as the servers prepare to actually serve them, and note the size of the tin cans being used to do that. Family meals, of course, could be cooked inside or outside your trailer. This particular very thin family, remember this is during the Depression, is about to try an air casserole, another term for nothing at all. They do have, however, a plate of bananas, and you'll note in the lower left-hand corner is a white gas stove, now used for cooking and heating meals. Here we see a couple about to enjoy a healthier airless meal consisting of fried chicken, lettuce, bread, and coffee. Next stop, Sarasota. Sarasota, next stop. In 1932, the Arcadia and Sarasota mayors fought to host the Winter Convention. In 1932, Sarasota won, and in 1934, membership stood at 800,000. 4 years later, members spent $650,000 in Sarasota, but they were no longer welcome. Why? Because Sarasota had become a tin canner's town, and the stigma continued. This colorized postcard shows the Tin Can Tourist Park, otherwise known as Payne Park. Over on the left, you see the large big top, which probably housed the travel trailers for sale. And on the right, you see part of the stadium, which would house the Boston Red Sox for their spring training. Next stop, Tampa. Tampa, next stop. It was back to Tampa, but storm clouds are on the horizon. In 1937, a huge snow and an immediate thaw, plus rains, made many roads impassable for the Midwest and Northeast members and trailer manufacturers because of flooding. Other Florida towns began enacting repressive ordinances for tin can tourist camps, including 1-hour parking, no cooking, and lot taxes. In 1937, Roosevelt's recession began, and that was coupled with the United Auto Workers strike. 90,000 units were built by trailer manufacturers, all on back order and requiring no money down. With this problem of the recession, they rapidly went out of business. The Automobile Tourists of America, a splinter group, held its 1938 Winter Convention a week later, so attendance was down and membership was down. But in 1938, Tampa built their new municipal park and offered the Tin Can Tourist a contract beginning in 1939, which would continue through 1954. Here we see part of the extent of the Ohio River flooding, which prevented people from coming down to Florida. Here we see a colorized postcard of the municipal park in 1939, where 1,200 trailers gathered to celebrate the Tin Can Tourist 20th anniversary. That number would up to 2,000 trailers the following year. Now, how did Tin Can Tourists know what was on the schedule if they didn't attend an actual convention? Tin Can Tourists took out ads in travel trailer magazines, automobile magazines, and news magazines to publicize what was to become either in Florida or in Michigan or Wisconsin. And here we see another ad now for the 1942 summer reunion in Traverse City, Michigan. This was to be held later on in 1942, long after war had been declared in December 1941. Now, with the advent of World War II, of course, GIs went off to fight in both the Atlantic and Pacific theaters. The jobs where they worked in their factories were now unfulfilled. The government, recognizing this, decided that they would need to produce housing for replacement workers that came up from the South or locally. Together with the national housing agencies developing federal specifications for producing what was called the committee trailer, these trailers were built from 1942 to 1943 when contracts were awarded the travel trailer companies. Over 35,000 of these trailers were built, measuring 8 feet wide by 22 feet long, made of Homosote, at a cost of $750 each to the trailer travel manufacturers. Rental charge was to be capped at $6.50 a month, and gas and rubber tire rationing would prevent all recreational travel beginning in May 1942 in the East, and by December 1942 for all states. The Florida governor, recognizing the drastic loss of income, wrote FDR to exempt the Tin Can Tourists from gas and tire rationing because the Florida economy now depended on them. Roosevelt rejected it. As a result, Tin Can Tourists stayed home. Homosote is a mixture of paper and glue, basically paper mache. It is rolled flat for panels to be screwed onto the wooden frames, and it received a thin coat of paint. When the paint wore off, rain and or snow melted Homosote like ice cream. Here we see a defense worker camp made of 200 Homosote trailers outside Erie, Pennsylvania for workers at the GE plant. There were no water facilities inside these Homosote trailers. They could be obtained in the washroom blockhouses you see here. Minimum of steel was used. These trailers were not meant to be towed more than one trip. There was a minimum of copper used also. Basically, you received enough wiring for one electrical outlet and one light bulb socket. Now, after World War II ended, rubber, steel, copper, and aircraft aluminum became available again. Production of cars and trucks as well as travel trailers resumed, and these two trailer manufacturers plus other makes were built using aircraft architecture. The 46 Spartan Manor seen on the left and the 47 Airstream liner on the right. There were still a few AutoCampers, however, and Nash decided to cater to them with their brand new Airflyte, otherwise known as a potato bug. Nash offered this roof tent option. Nash offered their famous fold-down front seats and provided you with mattresses both for the car and the tent. The kids slept on top, and the package also included Nash screen inserts for the side windows. A changing room was available on one side and a fly tent on the other side for cooking. TCT post-war demographics had changed, consisting now of mostly retirees and policemen, civil servants on pensions, with some farmers that could afford to take the winters off. There were few children. They were not wanted anyway, as it was decided that they would receive a better education staying at home for the entire school term rather than bouncing around Florida towns and cities. In 1948, the Tampa Winter Convention contained 1,500 trailers, but 1/3, 500 of these were full-time squatters, meaning not only did they never leave that particular campground, they never left the state. Lot rent was now at $12 a month, but included all utilities. In 1948, each Canner family spent $200 to $300 a month in Florida, but cities were still vying for winter convention. 1940 membership was down considerably at 100,000 from the huge 800,000 that you saw earlier. This photo depicts a few of the trailers and cars for Tin Can Tourists at the 1953 Winter Convention at Arcadia. Here we see two photos for Thanksgiving Convention, the first in '56 at Melbourne Park, Florida on the East Coast, and the second in '78 in Eustis, Florida, not far from Ocala in Central Florida. You can tell from the amount of servers that attendance is way down. In fact, the Eustis RV Park for Tin Can Tourists was the last Florida convention. City tourist camps had diminished considerably with the advent of motor courts and motels. Other factors contributing to the Tin Can Tourist decline included 1950s trailer production increasing because of baby boomers. The demographics were now for returning GIs to find homes in new suburbias and get new jobs. New jobs meant that you basically were offered a week or at the most 2 weeks vacation. So vacation travel trailer was to nearby state or federal parks. Optimizing that in the 1950s was the fact that interstate highways reduced travel time, so the less time you spent on the road and the more time you spent on vacation was very important. Also, Tin Can Tourist parks were being reclaimed from the Tin Can Tourist as they had become park slums. Migration was now to Florida mobile home parks, which offered full amenities, including pools, tennis courts, golf courses, community halls, and beach access. They offered gated security as well. Florida beckoned, as it does still today, with full-time living and Florida residency, with a considerable reduction in property taxes. Parks for seniors were established for 55-year-olds as a resident requirement. In the 1980s, the Tin Can Tourist held small rallies in Michigan and Wisconsin with some monthly luncheons. There were still a number of Tin Can Tourist members, but with no real place to go. Eventually, the Tin Can Tourist was unofficially laid down by 1988. If you thought, however, the Tin Can Tourist was dead and buried, you'd be wrong. 1998 was the rebirth of the Tin Can Tourist after Forrest Bone's 1998 presidency of the Vintage Airstream Club, where he had found the one make and model to be a little too restrictive. In talking with the Vintage Airstream Club founder, Bud Cooper, who had mentioned the defunct Tin Can Tourist as an all-inclusive club, he and Jerry Bone began researching history, which showed the name Tin Can Tourist was clear and could be registered, which it was in 1998. And that same year, they decided to host the first renewal gathering at Camp Dearborn in Milford, Michigan, just down the road from the GM Proving Grounds. And this was to be for all makes, regardless of year, although then, as of now, 75% of members owned vintage makes. 22 units attended that first renewal gathering, and by December, there were 50 charter members included. Annual gatherings continue through the current year, and over 400 different rallies, events, and caravans have been held through 2018. Here we see a much younger Forrest Bone orating on what was to become of camping during that first gathering without the need for a microphone in his coach's voice. And on the right, we see new canners enjoying their first dinner. Some timeline milestones include the 2000 winter reunion at Tampa, Florida's trade show, where 11 units attended. 2001 was a year of growth with the appointment of regional representatives, representatives at large, and state representatives. Tin Can Tourist now expanded internationally to Canada, the United Kingdom, France, Japan, Australia, and the Netherlands, all with international representatives worthy of the term Tin Can Tourist of the World. In 2004 was the establishment of the Hall of Fame for those who had made a significant contribution to the vintage trailer and motorhome community. To date, 21 inductees have been incorporated. In 2006 was the first National Road Caravan to celebrate the bicentennial of that particular road. That same year, Forrest was named the Exalted Chief Royal Tin Can Opener, a combination of both earlier terms, and Jerry, the Royal Exalted First Lady. Continuing with milestones, in 2007, 140 units attended the annual gathering at Camp Dearborn. That would jump to 160 units in 2009 and 180 units in 2014. 2007, 44 units attended Winter Convention at Cedar Key, where we entertained 2,000 visitors for our open house in 5 hours. That number would jump in 2012 to 57 units at Sertoma Youth Ranch, the home of Winter Convention, where it is still held. And this year, over 200 units attended the Sertoma Winter Convention to celebrate the Centennial. The Pennsylvania Route 6 Caravan was the second, the Lincoln Highway Centennial Caravan was the third, and the Super Duper Yooper Looper Caravan was the fourth. In 2006 was the National Road Caravan to celebrate the National Roads Bicentennial, much of which was surveyed by a young George Washington. Over 30 vintage rigs attended and traveled from its inception in Cumberland, Maryland, to the original 1837 terminus at Vandalia, Illinois. Along the way, we received excellent press coverage, not only with radio, but TV, as well as the press. We were met outside Indianapolis by the world-famous Indianapolis Motorcycle Police Escort, which traveled with us straight through the city of Indianapolis and much of the remaining county with their sirens wailing, all intersections being closed, and they performing their famous motorcycle acrobatics, including standing on their saddles with their arms outstretched. It left us all with a lifetime of thrills. And here we are, some of us anyway, traveling along the National Road. Now, with the prolific number of vintage makes being owned by Tin Can Tourist, it was decided early on to hold a competition, which would become the annual Concours d'Elegance. This was to be chaired by Jerry Bone, and Dan Piper would be the head judge. The photo below shows the efforts to make a winner of Ken and Landa Hindley's 1936 Curtiss Aerocar and 1938 International D-15 truck. And here it is after a total restoration. It is a show winner wherever it goes, and probably is the most photographed and publicized rig in the Tin Can Tourist. A photo shot of the interior includes the working intercom to the truck. It was legal back in the day for passengers to ride in travel trailers. Here we see an aerial shot of the Camp Dearborn Annual Gathering in 2014, the first sellout, showing 180 rigs. Additional areas have been allocated to increase that number. In 2010 was the Pennsylvania Route 6 Caravan. 20 units attended. It took 10 days. We offered 6 open houses. We ate at 3 vintage diners and 2 road houses, and ended up at 1 ruined amusement park. National Geographic has termed Route 6 to be one of America's most scenic drives. And here are 2 of the rigs that traveled with us. The Wayfarer RV with its neon signs in the back stating open bar or bar open, either is entirely welcome. And on the right, the 1936 Pierce Arrow Travel Lodge, which was produced in 3 different legs. Pierce Arrow decided to go into the travel trailer building operation in an effort to keep their automobile car company afloat. It didn't work, and Pierce Arrow went under in 1938. 2013 was the Lincoln Highway Centennial Caravan. 25 units attended. We traveled 14 days from Van Wert, Ohio to Kearney, Nebraska, Kearney being the exact midway point from Manhattan and San Francisco. We stayed there for a week-long celebration. We were offered free campgrounds or overnights along the way, and of course the quid pro quo being an open house. We were offered free meals, and the last day that we were in Kearney was the big parade, and over 12,000 people saw us parade through downtown area. It was easy to get lost along the Lincoln Highway, and we looked for the original concrete markers, just as travelers in 1913 did. If we were crossing the Tama, Iowa Bridge, we knew we weren't lost because Lincoln Highway is spelled out in concrete. The photo above shows the group participants standing and kneeling in front of John Kenner Culp's 1947 Westcraft, which he had lived in for the majority of his life. And upon his death, it was donated to the RV Heritage Museum and Hall of Fame in Elkhart, Indiana. It suffered a lack of maintenance and was retrieved by a Canner couple who totally restored it and is currently using it as well. The photo below shows where we camped in the Kearney, Nebraska City Park for the week prior to the parade. And here we are traveling down Central Avenue in Kearney, Nebraska, whereupon after the parade was ended, we would turn off on a side street and open up our rigs for 12,000 visitors. In 2015 was the Super Duper Yooper Looper Caravan. It ran for a week in July and early August. It took 10 days to travel around Michigan's Upper Peninsula, hence the term UP. It was the first time a traveling caterer was used to great success. 29 units attended, encountered no black flies, but plenty of dogs. Here we see a staging area for the Super Duper Yooper Looper Caravan with the famous Mackinac Bridge in the background, connecting the mainland to the UP. And here we see a chow line of canners with a partial dog in the lower right. Now, do canners enjoy entertainment just as much as their forebears did in the teens and 20s? Absolutely. This is Bugs Beddoe Band, a repeat performer under the big top in Camp Dearborn. And we usually find that dancing on tables in period clothes is almost a requirement. The annual Friday Nights Lights Contest continues to amaze everyone. And educational presentations such as Dan Hirschberger's 1920s motor camping demonstration continues, as does Hunt Jones's On the Road series, here showing the history of America's drive-in theaters. And here we see a levitated Tim Hines orating on travel trailer history. Entertainment continues with the only couple I know that ever ran away from a circus, Kensington and Harrington, showing their sword swallowing skills here. Entertainment also includes Terry Evans' annual treasure hunt. Here she is shown, including the teams on her scorecard. Also, the Exalted Chief Royal Can Opener Forrest Bone legally presided over 2 different weddings in his 13th century outfit, one in Michigan on the left and one in Florida on the right. We also witnessed a proposal at Winter Convention. And now, after a century, is the statement that everything old is new again applicable to the tin can tourist? It certainly is. Everything old is new again, and it's still rolling. Witness John Driscoll's 1949 Federal House car, which traveled from Oregon to the Tin Can Tourist 2017 Florida Winter Convention. For 100 years, the Tin Can Tourist continued to roll on. Our heartfelt thanks to Forrest and Jerry Bone for all their efforts to continue our rolling history.